Hello and welcome to the Vailrun Tapes. Every story here is true. It happened to a real person, and they wrote it down or said it out loud, so the rest of us would know. Tonight, I'll share a few of them with you. A lot of you come back here every night, and that means a lot to me. These stories stay with people. That's just what they do. Before we start, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read all of them. And if you like these stories, a quick like and subscribe really help. Now get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. Back in the late 1980s, there was a story that has stayed with me ever since. Not because I witnessed the events myself, but because I was close enough to someone who became personally involved in the aftermath. I didn't know the woman at the center of it. One of my colleagues did. They had attended university together, and from everything he ever said about her, she was exactly the kind of person you would expect to work in a highly sensitive government position. She was intelligent, calm, exceptionally responsible. The sort of person who followed every rule to the letter. According to him, she was one of the most ethical people he'd ever met. He couldn't imagine her deliberately breaking even a minor regulation, let alone violating the strict security procedures that came with working in a classified government laboratory. She was employed by CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and worked in a federal laboratory where the research was reportedly highly classified. Exactly what she worked on wasn't something anyone outside her immediate circle ever knew. Then, one day, everything changed. While at work, she suddenly became violently ill. Her condition deteriorated quickly enough that she required emergency medical attention. She wasn't transported by an ordinary civilian ambulance. Instead, military medical personnel reportedly took her to the hospital. Even before she arrived, it was obvious this wasn't going to be handled like a normal medical emergency. Once at the hospital, doctors immediately began trying to determine what had caused her condition. According to the account that eventually reached my colleague, she admitted she had intentionally taken something in an attempt to end her life. She reportedly told the medical staff that whatever she had swallowed wasn't working as quickly as she had expected. Naturally, the doctors asked the obvious question: what had she taken? Her answer only made the situation more alarming. She admitted the substance had come from the classified laboratory where she worked, but she refused to identify it. She would not tell the doctors its name. She would not describe its chemical properties. She would not explain how much she had taken. She only insisted that no one else was in danger because of what she had done. That was all she was willing to say. Members of CSIS had accompanied her to the hospital. According to the story my colleague later heard, they remained there because of the classified nature of her work and whatever material she had reportedly removed from the laboratory. The medical staff then turned to them. If the patient wouldn't identify the substance, surely the government representatives could. After all, laboratory inventory records would presumably show exactly what materials were missing. Instead, they reportedly refused. According to the account I heard, they acknowledged that internal records would very likely reveal what she had ingested. However, they maintained that national security obligations prevented them from disclosing that information. They would not tell the doctors. They would not release the records. And they reportedly would not cooperate beyond confirming that the situation involved classified material. If that account is accurate, it placed the physicians in an almost impossible position. Doctors rely on knowing what poison, chemical, or medication a patient has taken. Without that information, treatment often becomes little more than educated guesswork. Every minute matters. Yet the very information that might have guided treatment was allegedly being withheld. As her condition worsened, extraordinary precautions were reportedly put in place. She was moved into an isolation room. Military guards were assigned outside her door. Access became heavily restricted. The security measures didn't stop with hospital staff. According to what my colleague later learned, even her immediate family was denied access. Her husband reportedly wasn't allowed to enter the room. Neither were her parents. They couldn't sit beside her. They couldn't speak with her. They couldn't even say goodbye. Hours passed. Despite the efforts of the medical team, she eventually died. Even in her final hours, she reportedly never revealed exactly what substance she had taken. The only reassurance she continued to offer was that no one else would be harmed by what she had done. That statement has always struck me as oddly compassionate, considering the circumstances. Whatever her reasons, she apparently wanted the people around her to know they weren't in danger. Everything that happened afterward became even more difficult to understand. The reason I know about this story at all is because of my colleague. On the day all of this unfolded, he received an unexpected phone call. It was from the woman's husband. He wasn't calling simply to tell an old friend what had happened. He was desperately looking for legal help. According to my colleague, the husband wanted to force either the hospital or the government, or both, to allow him to see his wife before she died. He was frantic. Unfortunately, my colleague wasn't the right person for that kind of legal matter. He had no expertise in national security law or emergency injunctions. As much as he wanted to help, the only thing he could do was refer him to another lawyer who might have experience in that area. I remember how shaken my colleague was after hanging up the phone. He wasn't only upset by the apparent suicide attempt. He couldn't reconcile it with the person he thought he knew. He kept repeating that this simply wasn't something she would have done, not because he believed she couldn't struggle personally, but because deliberately removing a classified substance from a secure government laboratory would itself have been an extraordinary breach of every rule she had lived by. He found that almost as shocking as her apparent decision to take her own life. The woman he remembered from university had been meticulous about doing the right thing. Breaking security protocols of that magnitude seemed completely out of character. According to what eventually circulated afterward, the family's ordeal didn't end with her death. The reports my colleague heard claimed that her body was taken into government custody. It was allegedly cremated at an undisclosed government facility. The ashes, according to those accounts, were never returned to her husband or parents. Nor were they reportedly told exactly what became of her remains. I have never been able to independently verify every detail of what happened after her death. Some aspects of the story have always sounded almost unbelievable. At the same time, I have no reason to doubt that my colleague genuinely received that desperate phone call from her husband. I was there when it happened. I saw how deeply it affected him. He wasn't someone prone to exaggeration or conspiracy theories. If anything, he was one of the most practical people I've ever known. Whether every detail that followed was completely accurate, partly misunderstood, or altered over time through retelling, I honestly can't say. What I can say is that the emotional impact on the people connected to her was very real. Whenever I think back on the story, it isn't the secrecy that stays with me most. It's the image of a husband desperately trying to find a lawyer because he simply wanted permission to stand beside his dying wife. Whether or not every reported detail was exactly as later described, that's the part I've never forgotten. This version keeps the original account intact while making it smoother, easier to read, and clearly distinguishing reported claims from established facts where the details cannot be independently verified.
My family home had been passed down for 3 or 4 generations, so by the time I was growing up there, the house already carried a lot of history. It did not look ancient from the outside because different relatives had renovated it over the years. Rooms had been added, walls changed, and modern things installed. From the road. It looked like a fairly normal colonial-style house with a garage attached to it. There was nothing about it that immediately suggested tragedy or anything supernatural. But inside, you could still feel that the house had existed long before us. Some parts of the floor creaked no matter how carefully you walked. Certain doors never sat properly in their frames. In winter, cold air seemed to come from places no one could find. At night, sounds traveled through the walls in strange ways, so a noise from another room could sometimes seem as though it came from directly behind you. Most of the time, we ignored those things. With 5 siblings in the house, there was almost always someone awake, moving around, arguing, watching television, opening a cabinet, or going into the kitchen. If we heard footsteps in the hallway or a door closing, there was usually an obvious explanation. The garage was another story. It had been added or changed during one of the renovations, and it was connected closely enough to the rest of the house that sounds from inside could be heard from the living areas. My older brother liked working on projects there. He enjoyed taking things apart, fixing equipment, and experimenting with whatever mechanical or electrical objects caught his interest. Because of that, the garage was usually crowded. There were tools, boxes, scraps of wood, old equipment, half-finished projects, and things none of us fully understood. Some items belonged to my father, while others had been collected by different family members over the years. At night, the garage felt much larger than it really was. The car took up most of the center space, while the shelves and work areas created deep shadows around the walls. When the main light was off, only small amounts of light came through the windows or beneath the door from the house. This happened when I was around 12 or 13 years old. I cannot remember my exact age, but I know I was young enough to feel nervous about dark rooms while still being old enough to pretend I was not afraid. It was either a Friday or Saturday night, because my sisters and I were allowed to stay up later than usual. 2 of my sisters were with me, and the 3 of us were hanging around while the rest of the family slowly settled down for the evening. Earlier that night, something already felt wrong. I remember seeing my mother crying. This was unusual enough that my sisters and I immediately wanted to know what had happened. Children often assume that when a parent is upset, something terrible must be going on. We wondered whether someone had died, whether our parents were arguing, or whether there had been bad news we were not being told. We asked her why she was crying. She did not give us a real answer. She only said, "This day holds bad memories." That sentence stayed with me. At the time, I did not understand what she meant. I thought maybe something painful had happened years earlier, but she clearly did not want to explain it. My sisters and I kept asking questions, but she would not tell us more. Eventually, we stopped. The night continued normally, but the mood in the house had changed. Even though my mother tried to move on, I could still tell she was upset. I kept thinking about her words. This day holds bad memories. I wondered what memories she meant and why she could not tell us. By around 11 o'clock, my father was finishing his work and getting ready for bed. My older brother was asleep on the couch. He was completely passed out, lying there in a way that made it obvious he would not wake easily. My sisters and I were still awake. Then we heard a noise from the garage. It sounded like something shifting or being moved. At first, none of us became frightened because our immediate thought was that my older brother was working on one of his projects. He often went into the garage late and made enough noise to be heard through the wall. Then we looked toward the couch. He was still there. He had not moved. That meant someone else, or something else, was in the garage. The noise came again. It was not a single small tap. It sounded like something had bumped into a shelf or moved near the car. Our next thought was raccoons. Animals sometimes found ways into garages, sheds, and basements. A raccoon could easily knock over tools, open a box, or make a sound heavy enough to seem like a person. That explanation made sense. My father decided to check. He brought a shotgun. My sister grabbed a bat. I took a broom. Looking back, the image probably would have seemed funny from the outside. My father was prepared for a serious threat. My sister had something that could actually hurt an intruder, and I was carrying an ordinary broom as though I might fight off a raccoon with it. At the time, none of us were laughing. We opened the door leading into the garage. The space beyond was completely dark. My father entered first. My sister and I followed behind him, holding our ridiculous weapons and trying to look brave. The garage smelled like oil, old wood, dust, metal, and whatever chemicals my brother used for his projects. My father reached for the light switch. When he turned it on, the entire room became visible at once. Nothing was there. No raccoon stood near the shelves. No stranger hid beside the car. No tools rolled across the floor. The garage looked exactly as it normally did. We checked the corners. My father looked around the car, behind the workbench, and near the doors. We searched for signs that an animal had entered. There were no overturned boxes, open windows, or obvious paw prints. We listened for movement in the ceiling or walls. Everything was quiet. After a few minutes, my father decided there was nothing to worry about. He probably assumed something had settled on a shelf or that a small animal had already escaped. He left the garage and returned to getting ready for bed. My sister remained because she had become interested in my older brother's projects. She walked toward the work area and began looking over the things he had been building or repairing. I stayed with her. The light was still on, so the room no longer felt frightening. I began explaining some of the projects to her. I knew a little about what our brother was working on and tried to describe how certain pieces fit together. For a few moments, everything felt normal again. Then I had the sudden feeling that someone was watching me. There was no sound. Nothing moved. The feeling arrived without warning. It was so strong that I stopped speaking. The back of my neck tightened, and every part of me became alert. I did not have time to ask my sister whether she felt it too. We both turned around at exactly the same moment. She raised the bat. I lifted the broom. In front of the car stood a dark silhouette. It was completely black, darker than the shadows around it. I could not see a face, clothing, hands, or any details. The shape looked human. It appeared tall enough to be an adult, but the bottom of it did not seem properly connected to the ground. It looked as though it was floating. Another possibility was that it was hanging from something, though I could not see a rope, wire, or support above it. The figure simply remained in front of the car, staring at us. There was enough light in the garage that we should have been able to see more. The main bulb was on. The car reflected light. The walls and tools around the figure were visible, yet the shape itself remained only a silhouette. It had no features, no eyes, no visible mouth. Still, I knew it was looking at us. My sister and I froze. Neither of us swung our weapon or moved toward the door. The figure did not attack. It did not step forward. It hung there in absolute silence. For a moment, I thought it might be a reflection on the car window. Maybe one of us was seeing our own shape distorted in the glass. But it was standing in front of the car, not inside a reflection that matched our movements. It did not move when we did. It remained still. Then my sister screamed. The moment she did, the figure disappeared. It did not run away. It did not fade slowly. 1 second, it was there. The next, the space in front of the car was empty. My parents and older brother came running into the garage. My brother had been asleep only moments earlier, but the scream woke him immediately. My father returned quickly, probably still thinking there might be an intruder. They found my sister and me standing with the bat and broom, staring at the empty area in front of the car. We began talking at the same time. We told them that someone had been standing there. We described a dark shape with no visible face. We said it looked as though it was floating or hanging. The adults looked around. Nothing was there. The doors were still closed. There was no person hiding behind the car. No one could have crossed the garage and escaped in the second between my sister's scream and the family arriving. My parents tried to calm us down. They said we had probably seen a reflection in the car window. The garage light could have created strange shapes. My sister and I were standing near one another, holding objects, and the glass or polished metal might have reflected us in a distorted way. That was the explanation they preferred. We did not believe it. A reflection should have moved with us. The silhouette had remained still while both of us turned and raised our weapons. It also seemed to be in front of the car, not on the surface of a window. Most importantly, both of us had felt watched before seeing it. Neither of us told the other to turn around. We moved together because we sensed the same thing. Still, we were young, and the adults wanted the event to have a simple explanation. My mother was already emotionally upset because of the date. My father was tired and getting ready for bed. No one wanted to believe a shadowy figure had appeared in the garage. After searching again and finding nothing, we all went back inside. I do not think my sister and I stayed in the garage any longer. The rest of the night felt uncomfortable. Every sound from that direction made me think the figure had returned. I kept picturing the place in front of the car. I remembered the way the shape seemed to hang above the floor. At the time, I did not understand why that detail felt important. Years passed. My sister and I occasionally talked about the experience, but it was never something the whole family discussed seriously. It became one of those childhood memories that adults explain away. We had been tired. The garage was filled with reflections. The strange noises made us nervous. Our mother's sadness had put us in a dark mood. Perhaps our minds created a figure from the shape of the car and shadows around it. That explanation was possible. Two people can misinterpret the same object, especially if they are standing beside one another and already frightened. But the memory remained clear. We had not seen a vague shape out of the corner of our eyes. We turned together and looked directly at it. It was there long enough for us to understand that it looked human. Then it disappeared when my sister screamed. Years later, we learned the truth about that date. It was the anniversary of our great-uncle's death. More than 40 years before the night of our experience, he had taken his own life. He had hung himself. That was why my mother had been crying. That was why she said the day held bad memories. She had not wanted to tell her children about a family suicide late at night, especially when we were still young. The information alone was disturbing. Then we learned another detail. Our great-uncle's body had been found in the garage. More specifically, it had been found in the exact area where my sister and I saw the dark silhouette, in front of the car. I remember the chill that moved through me when I understood the connection. The figure had not simply looked like it was floating. It had looked like it was hanging. At 12 or 13, I did not know our great-uncle had died that way. My sister did not know either. We had no reason to create that image. My mother had only said the day held bad memories. She did not mention a person, a death, the garage, or hanging. Yet later that night, a human-shaped shadow appeared in the exact place where his body had been discovered decades earlier. That changed the entire memory. The noises from the garage may have been the first sign. Something wanted us to enter. My father searched first and found nothing. Then, after he left, my sister and I remained behind. We felt watched. We turned. The figure appeared. It may not have been there for my father. Maybe it was meant only for us. Or perhaps it had been there the whole time, but we were the only ones able to see it. I began wondering whether the anniversary mattered. If the same date returned each year, perhaps the house remembered what happened. Maybe certain events leave something behind, especially when they happen violently or with great emotional pain. My great-uncle had died in that space. His family had found him there. The memory of that moment may have remained connected to the garage long after renovations changed the rest of the house. The building had passed through generations, but the location had not forgotten. I do not know whether I believe in ghosts in the traditional sense. There may be logical explanations for what we saw. The silhouette could have been a reflection. The strange feeling may have come from fear after hearing noises. The timing with the anniversary could be coincidence, especially because we only learned the connection years later. Memory also changes. After discovering the truth, we may have remembered the figure as more clearly hanging than it originally appeared. That is possible. People often reshape old memories when new information gives them meaning. But some details existed before we knew anything. My sister screamed because she saw the same thing. We both described a silhouette. We both said it was floating or hanging. We both identified the exact location. Those parts did not come later. The anniversary only explained why they mattered. I sometimes think about my mother crying earlier that evening. Did she already feel something unusual in the house? Was she only grieving the memory, or did the anniversary always affect the building in some way? Perhaps she had heard noises from the garage on other years. Maybe she knew more than she told us. Families sometimes hide painful history from children. Believing silence will protect them. The problem is that houses do not always keep the same secrets. My great-uncle had been part of the family home long before I was born. His death became a story no one wanted to discuss. The house remained. The garage remained. The place where he was found became an ordinary parking space. Cars came and went. Tools were stored nearby. My brother built projects in the same room. Life continued around the location until the tragedy became invisible. But on the anniversary, something appeared there again. The silhouette did not speak. It did not try to hurt us. It only stared. Sometimes I wonder whether it was truly our great-uncle. Maybe it was only an image of his final moment, repeating without awareness. Some people believe traumatic events can leave an imprint on a place, like a recording that plays under certain conditions. If that is true, the figure may not have seen us at all. It may have been only a shadow of the past. But I remember the feeling of being watched. I remember that both of us turned before the figure appeared clearly. It felt aware of us. Another possibility is much darker. Maybe the thing in the garage was not our great-uncle. Perhaps something connected to his death remained there. The silhouette could have been using his shape or repeating the way he died. That would explain why it did not have a face. It was not a person returning. It was something imitating a tragedy. I prefer not to think about that possibility for long. The house did not have constant paranormal activity. We did not see figures every week or hear voices calling our names. Most days were normal. That makes the garage sighting stand out even more. It happened once. It happened on the anniversary. It appeared in the exact place. It looked like a hanging body. Then it disappeared. If the house had been filled with strange events all the time, I might blame our imaginations or say we had grown used to believing it was haunted. Instead, the experience seemed connected to one specific memory the adults had tried to keep hidden. My sister and I still remember it. We do not need to convince one another. She was there. I was there. We both turned at the same moment. We both saw the shape. When one person sees something strange, it can be dismissed as imagination. When two people see the same thing independently, the explanation becomes harder. The family's answer about the reflection never satisfied us. A reflection does not explain the garage noises. It does not explain why we both felt watched. It does not explain why the figure disappeared at the sound of a scream. It definitely does not explain the date or location. Maybe all of those things were coincidences. That is the safest answer. A strange sound brought us into a garage. The lighting created a human shape. Fear caused us to interpret it as floating. Years later, we learned about a suicide and connected the memories. That is possible. But every time I imagine the figure, I see it clearly in front of the car. It was not standing like a normal person. Its lower body did not seem to touch the floor. The shape hung in the air. For years, I thought that was only the strangest part of the sighting. Then, I learned how my great-uncle died. Now I think about what might have happened if my sister had not screamed. Would the silhouette have remained there? Would it have moved closer? Would we have seen a face? Or would it have continued hanging silently in the same place until we understood what we were looking at? I am grateful we never found out. The garage is still part of the family home. During the day, it looks ordinary. A car sits where it always sits. Tools and projects fill the work areas. Nothing marks the location where someone died more than 40 years before that night. But I know where it happened. So does my sister. We stood there without knowing the history and saw something shaped like a man suspended in the exact same space. My mother had told us only one thing. This day holds bad memories. By the end of that night, the house had shown us what she meant. When I was younger, my parents lived in a 3-bedroom house with all 4 of us children. It was a busy home, the kind where someone was always moving through the hallway, arguing over toys, calling for Mom, or trying to claim a room as their own. With 4 children and only 3 bedrooms, my parents had to come up with a system that would work as the family grew. The smallest bedroom in the house was what people often call the box room. It was narrow, simple, and only large enough for a small bed, a few toys, and perhaps a chest of drawers. It was not a terrible room, especially for a young child, but it was clearly the smallest bedroom in the house. The youngest child would sleep there. Then, when another baby was born and became old enough to need the room, the child already living there would move into one of the larger bedrooms with an older sibling. There was an age gap of around 4 years between each of us, so the timing worked quite well. Each child was usually around 3 or 4 years old when they moved out of the box room and made space for the next youngest sibling. At least, on paper, it was a good system. The room passed from one child to another over the years. First, my older brother slept there, then I did, and eventually my younger sister moved into it. When I was around 7 or 8 years old, she was about 3 and was sleeping in that small room by herself. At that age, I did not think there was anything especially wrong with it. It was simply the little bedroom. The house made ordinary noises at night, and young children often complained about shadows, bad dreams, or things they imagined in the dark. If any of us had been frightened while sleeping there, it was never treated as proof that something was wrong with the room. Children become scared easily. A coat on a chair can look like a person. A toy can cast a strange shadow. A foot slipping beneath the blankets can feel like something grabbing you. That was how the adults probably thought about it at the time. One morning, my mom went through her usual routine of waking all of us up. She moved from room to room, opening curtains, telling us to get dressed, and trying to pull sleepy children out of bed. It was the kind of normal family morning no one would expect to remember years later. Eventually, she reached my younger sister's room. When she opened the door, my sister was already awake. At least her eyes were open. She was sitting or lying in bed, completely still, staring toward one corner of the room. My mom spoke to her. She asked whether she was okay. My sister did not answer. She did not look toward the door or react to the sound of Mum's voice. Her eyes remained fixed on the corner. At first, my mum may have thought she was still half asleep. Small children sometimes wake in a confused state and stare without fully understanding where they are. But there was something wrong about the way my sister was looking. She seemed to be in a trance. Her expression was empty, but her attention was intense. It was as though she could clearly see something standing in that corner and did not want to look away from it. My mum asked again if she was all right. Still no response. Then she asked what she was staring at. My sister finally answered. The man with the hat. She did not sound as if she was making up a story. She said it like she was describing a real person standing inside the bedroom. My mum immediately became frightened. She looked toward the corner, but there was no man there. There was no coat hanging in a way that resembled a person, no large toy, and nothing obvious that should have looked like someone wearing a hat. The corner was empty. My sister continued staring at it. Mum went to get my dad with incredible speed. My father was a very practical, no-nonsense kind of person. He was not someone who liked ghost stories or dramatic explanations. If a door moved, it was because of air pressure. If a child heard footsteps, it was a pipe or floorboard. He entered the room and tried to wake my sister properly. He spoke to her firmly, touched her, and pulled her attention away from the corner. Eventually, she seemed to come out of the trance. She looked around as though she had just woken from a deep sleep. The man with the hat was gone. At the time, the event may have been explained as a dream. There are forms of sleepwalking and night terrors where a person can have their eyes open while still partly dreaming. Children can see figures that are not really there, especially during the moment between sleep and waking. That was probably what my parents told themselves. My sister had seen a man in a dream. She had not fully woken up. Once Dad brought her back to reality, the image disappeared. The story became one of those strange childhood moments families remember and sometimes laugh about later. But years passed, and eventually the subject of the box room came up again. By then, we were older and able to compare memories more clearly. Someone mentioned the morning when my younger sister stared into the corner and talked about the man with the hat. That was when my mom began listing other strange things that had happened in the same room. She had not told us everything before. Apparently, all of us had experienced things there when we were young. One of the most common complaints was the feeling of being dragged down the bed during the night. Each child who slept in the room had, at some point, called out or complained that something pulled them toward the bottom of the mattress. We would go to sleep with our heads resting normally on the pillow, then wake later with our bodies halfway down the bed. Our blankets would be twisted, and our feet might be hanging near the lower edge. A child can move a lot while sleeping, of course. Some people roll, kick, and shift so much that they wake facing the opposite direction. But the way we described it was different. We said we had been dragged. We felt as though something had taken hold of us and pulled. My mum remembered entering the room after hearing one of us making noise and finding us in strange positions. Sometimes she found us standing beside the bed. We might be upright in the dark, not fully awake, appearing confused or frightened. When she asked what happened, we gave strange answers or seemed unable to explain why we were standing. This had happened to more than one child. At the time, Mum may have believed we were sleepwalking. Children often do things at night they cannot remember in the morning. But hearing that each of us had similar experiences in the same bedroom made the pattern more disturbing. The room had passed from one child to another. We had not all slept there at the same time. We were also several years apart in age. It was unlikely that a 3-year-old copied a story from a sibling who had moved out of the room years earlier, especially if no one openly discussed it. Then my mom revealed another detail. My older brother had also spoken about the man with the hat. He had been around the same age as my younger sister when he slept in the box room. Years before she was born, he had apparently described a man wearing a hat inside that bedroom. This was not something I remembered hearing as a child. My brother had probably been too young to give many details, and the adults may have dismissed it as imagination. But now there were two children, years apart, who had seen the same kind of figure at roughly the same age. Neither should have known about the other's experience. That detail made it much harder to accept the man as part of an ordinary dream. Young children imagine monsters, but they do not always invent the same person in the same room. The figure was not described as a cartoon character, animal, or something from television. It was simply a man with a hat. That description is vague, but it has a very specific feeling to it. A dark man standing in the corner. A hat hiding part of his head or face. Someone watching a child sleep. The more we spoke about the room, the more memories returned. Some of us remembered waking with the feeling that someone was standing nearby. Others remembered refusing to look toward certain corners at night. There were times when the room felt colder than the rest of the house, although that could have been because of its size, ventilation, or position. The door sometimes seemed to move on its own. Small sounds came from the walls or floor. Each event by itself had a reasonable explanation. Together, they formed a pattern. The strangest part was how long the pattern continued without the children fully understanding it. When my brother was young, he slept in the room and saw the man with the hat. Then he moved out. Another child moved in. That child experienced being pulled down the bed or found standing in the dark. Then the room passed to the next youngest sibling. The same kinds of things happened again. My parents continued using it as the youngest child's bedroom. Looking back, I still cannot understand why. I know there were practical reasons. The house only had 3 bedrooms. The box room was designed for a small child, and the sleeping arrangement probably seemed like the only sensible choice. My parents also may not have connected the incidents at the time. A strange event happens once, then years pass. A child has a nightmare, and everyone forgets about it. Another child sleepwalks later, but no one remembers the first child doing something similar. The pattern only becomes obvious when people finally sit together and compare memories. Still, once my younger sister saw the man with the hat, I would have expected my mother to refuse to put another child in that room. Maybe she did not believe the room was truly haunted. Maybe she thought fear would only become worse if she treated it as real. Parents often avoid encouraging children's supernatural beliefs. If a child says there is a man in the corner, telling them the room is haunted could cause years of fear. It may have felt kinder to say it was a dream and continue normally, but that did not stop the experiences. The room seemed to affect each young child who slept there. It is possible there were completely natural reasons. The box room may have had poor airflow, making sleep restless. A badly positioned bed could cause children to slide down the mattress. The room may have been colder or darker, leading to vivid nightmares. A streetlight, tree branch, or object outside could cast a human-shaped shadow into the same corner every night. The shape may have looked like a man wearing a hat. Because each child moved into the room at around the same age, they might have gone through similar stages of imagination, sleepwalking, and night terrors. That explanation is logical. 3- and 4-year-olds often struggle to separate dreams from reality. They wake in the night and see shapes that disappear once the lights come on. Sleep paralysis can also create human figures, especially dark silhouettes near corners or doorways. Even young children can experience waking dreams where part of the brain remains asleep while the eyes are open. My sister's trance may have been a night terror. Her brain could have placed a dream figure in the room even though she appeared awake. But why the same man? Why the hat? Why did my brother describe him years earlier? Perhaps hats are a common feature in shadow figures because the shape of a lampshade, curtain, or furniture creates a wide outline above the head. Maybe both children saw the same shadow and interpreted it in the same way. That would make sense if the room had not changed much between them. The bed may have stayed in a similar position. The light from the window may have hit the same corner. A shelf, coat hook, or object could have produced a repeated illusion. But my mom said there was nothing in the corner that morning. She checked. The figure existed only for my sister. I sometimes wonder what the man looked like more clearly. Did he have a face? Was he tall? Was the hat wide or narrow? Did he stand completely still? My sister was too young to remember every detail now, and at the time no one wanted to question her too much. Maybe the adults were afraid of the answers. She may have said only the man with the hat because that was the most obvious feature. Perhaps she could not see his face. The hat could have cast a shadow over it. Maybe he stood in the corner every night and only became visible when a child was half awake. The dragging experiences are even more difficult to explain. Children move during sleep, but several of us used the same language. We felt pulled. We did not say we rolled or slipped. The sensation was that something external moved us. What would a figure in the corner want with a small child? Why pull them toward the bottom of the bed? Perhaps the movement was only part of a nightmare. The mind can create physical sensations during dreams. People feel themselves falling, floating, being grabbed, or unable to breathe. If a child woke after sliding down the mattress, the brain might invent the memory of being dragged. That is much more likely than an invisible person pulling children at night. But knowing my mother sometimes found us standing beside the bed makes it feel stranger. Maybe we were trying to get away. A child sees the man in the corner, attempts to leave the bed, and enters a sleepwalking state. By the time Mum arrives, the child is standing, but not fully awake. They cannot explain what frightened them because the dream has already faded. That scenario connects the events without requiring something supernatural. It also does not prove the room was safe. A recurring shadow, noise, or environmental problem could still have been frightening each child. There may even have been something harmful in the room, such as a low-frequency vibration, electrical issue, or poor ventilation. Certain environmental conditions can create unease, sleep problems, headaches, and the sensation of being watched. Old houses sometimes have wiring, heating, or structural problems that affect one room more than others. No one investigated that at the time. The room was simply used until each child outgrew it. Years later, when my mom finally told us the full list of incidents, I remember being amazed that she had continued putting children there. I could understand dismissing the first event, maybe even the second. But once several children were dragged down the bed, found standing at night and talking about the same man, I would have turned the room into storage. I would have slept in it myself before putting another 3-year-old there. When we said this to Mum, she probably defended herself by pointing out that nothing truly terrible happened. No one was injured. No child disappeared. The experiences stopped once each of us moved to a different room. That last detail did not comfort me. It made the box room seem like the source. The man with the hat did not follow us into the larger bedrooms. The dragging stopped. The strange trance-like moments did not continue as we grew older. Whatever happened was connected to that space and to the age of the child sleeping there. That is deeply unsettling. Why would something appear only to very young children? Some people believe children are more open to supernatural things because they have not yet learned what is impossible. Adults see an empty corner because they expect it to be empty. A child may see what is actually there. I do not know whether I believe that, but the story fits the idea. My mom saw only her daughter staring. My sister saw a man. My father entered and woke her. The figure disappeared. My brother had seen him years before, but the adults had forgotten or kept it quiet. Each child moved through the room too young to understand the history. Perhaps the man had been there long before any of us. I do not know much about the house's past. Maybe someone died there. Maybe an earlier owner wore a particular hat. Perhaps the room had once been used for something other than sleeping. Small rooms in old houses sometimes begin as storage spaces, servants' rooms, or parts of larger areas that were divided during renovation. If a person had spent years in that room, something of them might have remained. Or perhaps the man was never human. The image of a shadowy figure in a hat appears in many unrelated stories. People from different places describe waking to see a tall, dark man wearing a wide-brimmed hat. Some call him the Hat Man. I did not know about those stories when I was a child, and neither did my younger sister. Learning later that other people described similar figures makes the experience more disturbing, though it may also offer a psychological explanation. Human brains may create the same basic shape during sleep paralysis because a hat makes an unclear shadow look more human. A head with a wide outline is easy to imagine in darkness. Still, two children in the same room saw him years apart. That is the part I cannot move past. My older brother and younger sister were not sharing stories. They were not trying to frighten each other. They were both around 3 or 4 years old. They both described a man wearing a hat. Maybe every one of us saw him, and only those two spoke clearly enough for the adults to remember. I slept in that room too. I do not have a direct memory of seeing the man, but I wonder whether some of my old fears came from him. Children forget much of what happens before the age of 5. I may have stood in the dark and stared at the same corner. I may have told Mom about someone watching me. Perhaps she forgot because it became one event among many. Sometimes I try to picture the room as it was then. A small bed pushed against the wall. A narrow space between furniture. Toys scattered around. Morning light entering through the curtains. My sister sitting completely still, her eyes fixed on the corner. Mom asking what she was looking at. The man with the hat. There is something frightening about the simplicity of that answer. She did not describe a monster. She did not scream. She only named what she saw. That calmness makes the moment feel real. If she had been crying wildly, it might have looked like a nightmare. Instead, she seemed hypnotized. She could not look away. My father's no-nonsense reaction may have broken whatever state she was in. He entered, spoke firmly, and pulled her back into the ordinary world. Maybe that was all she needed to wake fully. Or perhaps the figure left, because another adult came into the room. I wonder whether it disliked being seen by grown people. The room eventually stopped being used in the same way as we grew older, and the family arrangements changed. Nothing dramatic happened to it. There was no exorcism, investigation, or discovery inside the walls. The man with the hat was never seen by an adult. No explanation was found. The story remains part of our family history. We laugh sometimes about how Mum kept sending each new youngest child into the haunted room, but beneath the joke is real discomfort. She knew enough to remember the dragging. She knew we had been found standing at night. She knew my brother had spoken about the man. Then she opened the door one morning and saw her 3-year-old daughter staring at him. I understand that parents make decisions based on practical needs, and I do not truly blame her. But it still baffles me. After everything, the room continued being treated like a normal bedroom. Maybe that was the only reason we were able to live there. If the adults had admitted something was wrong, the fear might have taken over the entire house. By refusing to believe, they kept the rest of us calm. The man remained in the corner of one small room. He did not become part of every shadow. Even now, the story still frightens me. Not because anything violent happened, but because of the pattern. One child can have a nightmare. Two children, years apart, can possibly imagine the same kind of figure. Several children can move strangely in their sleep. Every detail has a normal explanation. But when you place them all together, the room feels wrong. Each of us entered it at around the same age. Each of us left it a few years later. Some complained of being dragged. Some were found standing in the dark. At least two saw a man wearing a hat. Then the experiences stopped when we moved out of the room. I sometimes think about the youngest child who slept there last. Did the man know there would be no more children after them? Did he disappear once the room was no longer used? Or is he still standing in the same corner, waiting for another small bed to be placed there? Maybe he was never real. Maybe the entire story is a combination of sleepwalking, shadows, and childhood imagination. That is what I prefer to believe. But if I ever walked into a bedroom and found my child staring silently into an empty corner, I know exactly what question I would be afraid to ask. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I would already know the answer. The man with the hat. My mom and I moved into another apartment. At first, there was nothing about the place that seemed especially frightening. It was simply a new home, and like most new apartments, it took some time to get used to the rooms, the sounds, and the way everything was arranged. We were still unpacking, learning where to put things, and trying to make the place feel like ours. The first strange thing happened before we had been there very long. I had walked to the new apartment wearing a scarf and a necklace. I remember taking off my scarf after arriving and suddenly realizing the necklace was gone. It was not a cheap piece of jewelry I could easily forget about. I noticed the loss almost immediately and began searching for it. I checked around the entrance. I looked through my clothes and shook out the scarf in case the necklace had become caught inside the fabric. I searched my pockets, the floor, and the area where I had taken everything off. Nothing. I thought perhaps the chain had broken while I was walking. That seemed like the most logical explanation. Maybe it had fallen somewhere along the route without me noticing. I went back outside and retraced the entire walk. I moved slowly, scanning the pavement and checking the sides of the path. I looked near cracks, drains, grass, and anywhere a small metal chain might have landed. I searched the whole way back. I found nothing. When I returned to the apartment, I checked again. I removed my shoes and looked inside them. I checked my socks too, even though it seemed impossible that the necklace could have fallen into one without me feeling it. I searched my clothes more carefully. I ran my hands through the scarf and checked every fold. The necklace was gone. For the next few days, I kept thinking it might appear somewhere obvious. Sometimes people misplace things and later find them under a coat, inside a bag, or behind furniture. But it did not show up. Around 2 weeks after we moved in, my mom ordered me a replacement. By that point, we had accepted that the old necklace was lost. There was no reason to keep searching for it. The chain had probably broken outside, and someone may have picked it up before I walked back. The new necklace arrived about a week later. Then the old one reappeared. I woke up or entered my bedroom and saw it lying on the floor beside my bed. It was not near the door or hidden under furniture. It was directly next to the bed, close to where my head would have been while I slept. I stared at it for several seconds before picking it up. It was definitely the missing necklace. The chain was not broken. The clasp worked. There was no obvious damage that explained how it could have fallen off while I was walking. That was the first part that disturbed me. If the chain had broken, then losing it outside would have made sense. But it was still complete. The second disturbing detail was where it appeared. It had been placed beside my head. I had searched the room after moving in. My mom had also been cleaning and organizing. If the necklace had somehow fallen into a box or become trapped inside clothing, it might have been discovered in a drawer or among our belongings. It should not have appeared neatly beside the bed 3 weeks after it vanished. I asked my mom whether she had found it and placed it there. She had not. There was no one else living with us. I tried to think of a normal explanation. Maybe the necklace had been tangled in my hair or clothes for much longer than I realized and finally fallen out. That was not possible. I had changed clothes, showered, and lived normally for weeks. Maybe it had been caught inside the scarf and dropped later. But the scarf had been searched repeatedly and moved around. The necklace could not remain hidden inside it for that long without making a sound or falling out somewhere else. I wondered whether my mom had found it and forgotten placing it beside the bed. She was certain she had not. At the time, the event felt strange, but it was still only one missing object. It was easier to believe that one of us had overlooked something than to believe an object had disappeared and returned on its own. We continued living in the apartment. The next strange event involved the refrigerator. One day, my mom wanted to go shopping for groceries. Before leaving, she checked what we already had so she would know what to buy. She opened the fridge and noticed that one item was missing. I do not remember exactly what the item was, but she was sure we had either run out or no longer had it. She checked the shelf where it should have been and did not see it. She added it to the shopping list and went to the store. When she came home, she put away the groceries. Then she opened the refrigerator again. The missing item fell out. It had been inside the fridge after all. The object came forward as soon as the door opened, as if it had been placed close to the edge. My mom was confused. She had looked for it before leaving. It had not been hidden behind something large or pushed into a corner. She was careful enough to know whether it was there. Yet when she returned, the item appeared immediately. That reminded us of the necklace. Something was missing. We searched. Later, it returned in a place where it should have been impossible to overlook. Once again, there was a normal explanation available. My mom could have missed the item. Fridges can become crowded, and things are often hidden behind containers. She may have looked quickly, assumed it was gone, and left. When she returned, another object could have shifted and caused the missing item to slide forward. That happens. Still, she was certain she had checked properly. It felt as if the apartment was moving things and then returning them after we accepted they were gone. A few days later, another object disappeared. My mom was in the bathroom using a glass nail file. The file broke. One half remained in her hand or fell nearby. The other half vanished. We searched the bathroom carefully because broken glass can be dangerous. We looked on the floor, beneath cabinets, behind the toilet, near the sink, and anywhere the sharp piece might have bounced. The bathroom was not large. There were only so many places a broken object could go. We checked towels, bins, shelves, and corners. Nothing. The missing half was completely gone. We worried someone might step on it later, so we searched again. Still nothing. Unlike the necklace and grocery item, the broken piece never returned. Even when we moved out, we checked the bathroom again. We looked in places that had been covered by our belongings and areas that had been difficult to reach before. The second half of the nail file was never found. That made the situation more serious. A necklace can become caught in fabric. Food can be overlooked in a refrigerator. But a piece of broken glass cannot simply disappear from a small bathroom. It had to land somewhere. It could not pass through the floor. It could not dissolve. We considered whether it had fallen into the sink or toilet. That seemed unlikely, and my mom would probably have heard it. We checked the drains and surrounding areas. There was no sign of it. Maybe it had landed inside clothing or a towel and been carried out of the room. But we would likely have found it later. The fact that it remained missing even when the apartment was emptied made it impossible to explain. Around that time, the bathroom began feeling like the center of the strange activity. There was a glass door in the bathroom that led to an attic area. The design itself was unusual. I do not know whether the attic entrance had originally been somewhere else or whether the apartment had been renovated, but the door was there, built into the bathroom. Because it was made of glass, we could see its surface clearly, though the area beyond it was darker. The attic was not a place we used regularly. It felt separate from the rest of the apartment, like part of the building that did not fully belong to us. Then my mom began waking at night to find the bathroom light on. At first, she assumed I had used the bathroom and forgotten to switch it off. She would get out of bed, walk into the hallway, and turn the light off. Later the same night, she would wake again. The light was back on. She turned it off again. Then, it happened another time. This repeated several times in one night. I was asleep. My mom knew I had not been moving through the apartment. She was a light enough sleeper that she would have noticed me opening doors, walking to the bathroom, and returning to bed. Even if I had been sleepwalking, I would have needed to leave my room, switch on the light, and go back without waking her. Doing it once might have been possible. Doing it several times in one night was much harder to believe. The switch was not the kind that could easily move on its own. Someone had to physically turn the light on. We thought about electrical problems. A faulty switch or wiring issue could cause a light to flicker or remain on. But this light was not flickering. It was fully on. My mom would switch it off, return to bed, and later find it on again. We considered whether the bulb or switch could have a loose connection. That might explain unexpected behavior, but normally a loose connection causes a light to turn off, flicker, or respond badly when touched. It does not usually move a wall switch back into the on position. My mom began checking the bathroom more carefully. She looked at the window, the door, and the attic entrance. Nothing appeared disturbed. The apartment remained locked. No one else should have been inside. By then, the events were no longer easy to treat separately. The necklace disappeared and returned beside my head. The grocery item vanished from the fridge and fell out after my mom came home. Half of a broken nail file disappeared from a closed bathroom. The bathroom light turned itself on repeatedly at night. It felt like something was interacting with our belongings and moving through the apartment while we slept or left rooms empty. The most frightening moment came when we noticed the handprint. There was a fresh-looking handprint on the glass door leading to the attic. It was visible enough that we could make out the shape. A palm. Fingers, the kind of mark someone leaves when pressing their hand against glass. We stared at it. Neither of us remembered touching the door. The mark looked recent, not like an old dusty print that had been there before we moved in. The height and position made it feel as though someone had pressed from one side of the glass. I do not remember whether the print was on the bathroom side or the attic side, but either possibility was disturbing. If it was on our side, then someone had stood in the bathroom and placed the hand there. If it was on the attic side, then someone had been inside the attic. We had not invited anyone in. We did not know of anyone who had access. My mom checked the apartment and locks. There was no sign of forced entry. Nothing had been stolen. No drawers had been opened or rooms searched. The activity did not feel like a normal burglary. A burglar does not usually return a necklace, hide groceries, remove part of a broken nail file, turn on a bathroom light repeatedly, and leave a handprint on an attic door. Still, there was one important detail. The landlord had a key. We learned that later. Where we lived, the landlord keeping or using a key without our knowledge was illegal. We had not been told that someone else could enter the apartment. That created a possible human explanation. Maybe the landlord had come inside while we were away. Perhaps he moved things, entered the bathroom, or used the attic access. The handprint could have belonged to him. The missing food item might have been moved during an unauthorized visit. The broken nail file could have been picked up and removed. That possibility was extremely disturbing because it meant someone had access to our home without permission. It also made the necklace's location beside my bed feel much more threatening. If a person had placed it there, then someone had entered my bedroom and stood close to where I slept. Maybe they found the necklace outside, in the hallway, or elsewhere in the building. Perhaps they recognized it and returned it without speaking to us. But why place it next to my head instead of leaving it on a table or telling my mom? Why wait 3 weeks? Why enter the bedroom at all? The landlord explanation also failed to explain the bathroom light. Someone could enter the apartment and switch it on, but my mom was awake in the home that night. She turned it off several times. A person would have needed to hide inside the apartment or attic and switch it on again after she returned to bed. That would mean someone was moving around while we were sleeping. It is hard to decide whether that is more or less frightening than a ghost. We began feeling unsafe. Every sound from the bathroom made us listen. Whenever something went missing, we wondered whether it would return somewhere strange. My mom checked the locks more often. We looked at the attic door and tried to see whether anything had changed. The handprint remained the final warning. After noticing it, we decided to move out. We no longer wanted to stay and wait for something worse to happen. There was no point in proving whether the cause was paranormal or human. Both possibilities were dangerous in different ways. If a person had a key and entered without permission, we could not trust the apartment. If no person was responsible, then we had no way to stop whatever was happening. We packed our belongings and left. During the move, we searched for the missing half of the nail file again. The room was emptied. Furniture and boxes were removed. The places we had been unable to reach were finally visible. The glass piece was not there. That confirmed at least one object had disappeared in a way we could not explain. The old necklace came with us. The new one my mom ordered was still there too. I sometimes looked at both and thought about the weeks between losing one and finding it. The old necklace had traveled from somewhere outside the apartment or somewhere hidden inside it to the floor beside my bed. There was no dirt or damage that suggested it had been lying outside. It looked normal. Maybe it had been in the apartment all along. Maybe I overlooked it under the bed. But the place where it appeared was so visible. I would have noticed it. My mom would have noticed it while cleaning. It was not partly hidden. It lay next to my head. That detail has never stopped bothering me. After we moved, the strange events stopped. We did not continue losing objects in the same way. Lights did not turn on repeatedly at night. No new handprints appeared on doors. That suggests the problem was connected to the apartment. It did not follow us. Over the years, I have considered several possible explanations. The first is simple forgetfulness. Moving is stressful. People misplace things. The necklace could have become tangled in bedding or clothing and fallen later. My mom could have missed the grocery item in the fridge. The nail file could have broken into an area we failed to search properly. The bathroom light could have had faulty wiring. The handprint may have already been on the glass and only became visible because of steam, dust, or a change in lighting. This explanation does not require anything supernatural or criminal. Every event has its own ordinary cause. The problem is the pattern. Too many things happened in a short period. Objects vanished and reappeared. One disappeared permanently. The bathroom light behaved strangely. A fresh handprint appeared on a door leading to an attic no one should have been using. It did not feel random while we were living through it. It felt like a presence making itself more obvious. The second explanation is that the landlord entered. He had a key. That was real. He may have visited the apartment without telling us. Landlords sometimes inspect properties illegally, especially when tenants are away. He could have moved things by accident, opened the fridge, entered the bathroom, and left a print on the attic door. But why would he hide a nail file? Why return a necklace beside my bed? Why turn on a bathroom light again and again during one night while my mom was home? For the landlord explanation to work, his behavior would need to be extremely strange and invasive. He would have needed to enter silently, move through the apartment without being seen, and possibly hide in the attic. That idea is terrifying, because the bathroom door led directly to that space. What if he was using the attic to enter? Maybe the attic connected to another part of the building. Perhaps he could access it from outside our apartment and come through the glass door. If so, the handprint might have been evidence that someone stood on the other side. The missing nail file could have been kicked or carried into the attic. The bathroom light might have turned on because someone opened the door or moved through the room. This theory explains more than the idea of a simple spare key. But we never found proof of another access route. We did not hear anyone opening the attic door. There were no footprints, broken locks, or missing valuables. The third explanation is paranormal. Something in the apartment moved objects. It returned some and kept others. It turned on the light. It left a handprint. Maybe the attic was the source. Old building spaces often create strange sounds, drafts, and shadows. They also collect forgotten objects and history. Perhaps someone had died there or lived in that apartment before us. We never learned enough about the property to know. The activity may have been playful rather than violent at first. Taking a necklace, hiding food, removing a piece of glass. Then it became more direct, turning on the light, leaving a handprint. That progression made us feel as though something wanted to be noticed. The necklace beside my head could have been a message. Maybe it was returning what belonged to me. Or maybe it wanted me to know it had been close while I slept. That is the thought I dislike most. The apartment may have contained nothing supernatural at all, but someone or something entered my personal space. The necklace was placed exactly where I would see it after waking. It was not hidden. It was presented. The handprint had the same feeling. It was left on glass where we could see it. By then, the activity no longer felt accidental. We had noticed the missing objects. We had noticed the light. Then we found the shape of a human hand. We never discovered who it belonged to. The landlord may have known more than he admitted. Perhaps another tenant had access to the attic. Maybe a previous resident still had a key. It is possible someone entered for reasons unrelated to us and moved things accidentally. But that still does not explain everything. Sometimes I wonder whether the old necklace was ever lost outside at all. What if it disappeared after I entered the apartment? Maybe I walked in wearing it, removed the scarf, and something took the necklace before I noticed. I assumed it fell along the route because that was the only logical explanation. If it came off inside, it should have been near the entrance. We searched there. What if someone picked it up immediately? Then, weeks later, it was returned beside my bed. That would mean the strange activity began on the first day. It may have been waiting for us. The grocery item could have been another test. The nail file was more aggressive because it involved broken glass. The bathroom light drew attention toward the attic. The handprint finally showed us where to look. Maybe all of it led to that door. We moved before anything came through it. To this day, my mom and I have no clear answer. We know the landlord had a key, and that alone was enough to make us uncomfortable. But a key does not explain an intact necklace returning after 3 weeks. It does not explain a light switching on several times while someone is asleep nearby. It does not explain the missing glass. It does not explain why the handprint looked fresh. The normal explanations are possible only if we treat every event as unrelated. The supernatural explanation connects them, but requires believing something impossible happened. The human explanation connects some of them, but suggests someone was entering our apartment and possibly hiding in the attic. Neither answer is comforting. I am glad we moved. People often remain in strange places because nothing openly dangerous has happened yet. They wait for stronger proof. We did not. A home should feel private. You should not find missing objects beside your head. You should not wake to lights turning on repeatedly. You should not discover someone's handprint on a door leading into a dark space above your apartment. Maybe we left because of a ghost. Maybe we left because of a landlord. Either way, something had access to our home that we did not.
Quick pause, then we're right back. A lot of people watch one story and leave, but some stick around. They hit subscribe and come back every night. If you want to be one of them, the button's right there. Turn on the bell too, so you never miss a new one. That's it. Let's get back to the story.
When I was young, I used to see an old man every once in a while. At first, I did not understand that there was anything unusual about him. He looked like an ordinary elderly man, the kind of person you might pass on the street without thinking about it. I cannot remember exactly what he wore every time, but I remember his face. He had an old, tired appearance, with deep lines in his skin and eyes that seemed fixed on me even when there were many other people around. The first time I noticed him, he was standing in a crowd. I was with my family, and there were people moving in every direction. I do not remember where we were going or why the place was so busy, but I remember looking through the crowd and seeing him. Everyone else was walking, talking, or paying attention to something nearby. The old man was standing still. He was not looking at the people around him. He was looking directly at me. At that age, I did not immediately become frightened. Children are used to adults staring at them for harmless reasons. Maybe I reminded him of someone. Maybe he knew my parents. Maybe he was not even looking at me, and I only believed he was because our eyes happened to meet. I looked away and continued following my family. When I looked back, I could no longer find him among the people. The sighting lasted only a few seconds, and I forgot about it soon afterward. Sometime later, I saw him again. This time, there was no crowd between us. I was outside near my home when I noticed someone standing farther down the street. It was the same old man. He was too far away for me to see every detail clearly, but I recognized his shape, his face, and the way he stood. He was facing me. Once again, he was not walking or doing anything that gave him a reason to be there. He simply watched. I remember wondering whether he lived nearby. I had never seen him enter one of the neighboring houses, and I did not know any older man who looked like him. Still, there was nothing illegal about someone standing on a public street, so I tried not to panic. I went inside and told myself he was probably visiting a neighbor. The next time I looked outside, he was gone. The second sighting stayed in my mind longer because he had been closer than before. The first time, he was surrounded by strangers in a busy place. The second time, he was on my street where there were fewer people and fewer reasons for him to be watching me. After that, I began noticing a pattern. Every time I saw the old man, he was closer. I would go weeks or even months without seeing him, long enough to convince myself that I had imagined the connection. Then he would appear again. He never approached me openly. He never waved, spoke, or tried to introduce himself. He only stood there and watched. The distance between us became smaller each time. I started looking for him whenever I left the house. If we went somewhere crowded, I searched the faces around me. If I walked down the street, I looked behind parked cars and toward the ends of sidewalks. I did not tell many people because I knew how it would sound. A child saying that an old man kept appearing closer and closer would probably be treated as imagination or fear. Adults might say I was seeing different men and deciding they were the same person. That was possible. Elderly people can share similar features, especially when seen from a distance. But I felt certain it was him. There was something about his eyes and the way he stood that made him easy to recognize. The sighting that truly frightened me happened when I saw him outside my bedroom window. Until then, he had always been far enough away that I could pretend he had a normal reason to be in the area. A crowd was public. A street was public. My window was not. I was inside my room when I suddenly had the feeling that someone was looking at me. I turned toward the glass and saw the old man outside. He was standing close enough that I could see his face much more clearly than before. He looked directly into the room. I do not remember whether my bedroom was on the ground floor or whether he stood somewhere that allowed him to reach the window, but I remember the shock of seeing him there. There was glass between us, yet he felt much too close. He did not knock. He did not smile. He only stared. I moved away from the window and called for someone. But by the time another person came, or I looked again, he had disappeared. There was no sign of him in the yard or near the house. No one believed that an old stranger had been watching through my window. They suggested I saw a reflection, a tree, or a person passing outside. I knew what I saw. After that, I expected him to return very soon. If he had moved from a crowd to my street and then to my window, I could not imagine how much closer he could get without entering the house. Then he disappeared. I did not see him again for months. At first, the silence made me more nervous. Every night, I checked the windows and curtains. Whenever someone walked past the house, I wondered whether it was him. I expected to wake and find his face pressed against the glass, but days passed without another sighting. Then weeks passed. Eventually, I started to relax. I told myself the old man had been a stranger who moved away or stopped visiting the area. Maybe he had never been following me at all. Perhaps I had connected several unrelated sightings because I was young and frightened. The longer he stayed gone, the easier that explanation became. I began sleeping normally again. I stopped looking for him every time I went outside. The memory slowly became less immediate, though I never fully forgot his face. When I was 11 years old, everything changed. One night, I was asleep in my bedroom when I heard my dad call my name. His voice sounded clear enough to wake me. It did not sound like part of a dream or a noise from outside. It was my father's voice, coming from somewhere beyond my room. I sat up and listened. The house was quiet. I assumed he needed something. Maybe he wanted help. Or perhaps I had forgotten to do something before bed. I got out of bed and opened my door. The hallway was dark, though there may have been a small amount of light coming from another room. I stepped into it and called out, asking what he wanted. There was no answer. I waited for a few seconds, expecting him to speak from his bedroom or from downstairs. Nothing happened. I thought perhaps he had called in his sleep. My father might have been dreaming or believed he heard something. I was about to return to bed when I heard my name again. It was the same voice, my dad's voice. This time it came from farther inside the house, possibly from the living room. The call was not loud or frightening. It sounded calm, almost as if he expected me to follow it. I walked farther down the hallway. The house felt unusually still. I could not hear a television, footsteps, or normal movement from my parents. I called out again. "Dad?" No response. I asked what he wanted. Silence returned. I should have gone back to my room. I should have woken my mom or checked my parents' bedroom first. But I was 11, and I believed my father had called me. There was no reason to think his voice belonged to anyone else. I continued toward the living room. As I entered, I looked around for him. The furniture was dark, familiar. No one stood near the couch or doorway. The room appeared empty. I listened carefully. My heart was beating faster now because something felt wrong. If my dad wanted me, why would he keep calling without answering my questions? Maybe he was outside. Perhaps he had heard a noise and wanted me to come to the front door. That explanation was strange, but it was the only one I could form. Then I heard my name for the third time. The voice came from the direction of the front of the house. I turned toward the door. Our front door was made almost entirely of glass. During the day, it allowed light into the house and gave us a clear view outside. At night, it became a dark, reflective surface, unless something stood close to it. I looked through the glass. The old man was standing on the other side. He was directly outside the door. For months, I had wondered how much closer he could come after appearing at my window. Now I had the answer. He was only a few feet away, separated from me by a sheet of glass. He was smiling. It was not a small or friendly smile. His grin was huge, stretched far across his face in a way that made him look excited that I had finally come to the door. His eyes were fixed on me. He did not look surprised to see me. He had been waiting. I froze. I could not scream or move at first. My body stopped responding. I stood in the living room staring at him while he stared back. The house behind me felt empty, even though my family was sleeping somewhere inside it. The old man slowly raised one hand. Near the door was a window or opening that could be moved from outside. I watched him begin to open it. He did not rush. He moved slowly, almost calmly, as though he knew I was too frightened to run. The window made a soft sound as it opened. Cool night air entered the room. I wanted to back away, but my legs would not move. I could only watch as the gap became wider. The old man leaned closer. His grin remained on his face. Then he opened his mouth. He said my name. The voice that came out was my father's. It was exact. It did not simply sound similar. It had the same tone, the same way of speaking, and the same sound I had heard from my bed and in the hallway. The old man had been the one calling me through the house. That was the moment I finally screamed. The sound came out of me before I could think. I screamed as loudly as I could and stumbled backward. The old man's expression changed only slightly. Then he turned and ran away from the door. He moved faster than I expected from someone who looked so old. He disappeared into the darkness before I could see where he went. I did not follow him or look through another window. I only stood there screaming. My mom came running downstairs, shouting and asking what was wrong. Her sudden arrival broke the feeling that I was alone. I pointed toward the door and tried to explain what had happened. I told her about the old man, the window, and the voice. I said he had called my name exactly like Dad. She checked the door and looked outside. No one was there. There may have been no footprints, no damage, and no sign that someone had stood outside. The window was open or partly moved, but even that may have been explained away as something I had done or something that was already loose. My mother did not believe the full story. She probably thought I had been dreaming or sleepwalking. I had woken in the middle of the night, heard a sound, and frightened myself after seeing a reflection in the glass. That would have been the reasonable explanation. I insisted that I had been awake. I told her I had followed Dad's voice from my bedroom into the hallway and then into the living room. I explained that the old man spoke through the opening using the exact same voice. She tried to calm me down, but I could see that she did not understand. Maybe she believed I had experienced a nightmare that continued after I left bed. Children can have night terrors and waking dreams that feel completely real. It is possible to see figures, hear voices, and move through a house while only partly awake. But I remember the cold air from the opening. I remember the grin. I remember the old man running away after I screamed. Most of all, I remember my father's voice coming from his mouth. After that night, I never saw the old man again. He did not return to the street. He did not appear in crowds. I never found him outside my window or door. The sightings stopped completely. That should have brought relief, but it created another question. Why had he been appearing closer and closer over the years? Had he been working toward that final night? The first sighting in the crowd may have been him noticing me. The second sighting on my street showed that he knew where I lived. The window proved he could reach the property. Then he disappeared long enough for me to lower my guard. When he returned, he used my father's voice to bring me to the front door. That sequence makes it feel planned. Maybe the old man was a real person who had been watching me. If so, he was extremely dangerous. He may have followed my family, learned where I lived, and observed us long enough to imitate my father. Some people can copy voices very well, especially if they have heard someone speaking many times. A stalker could stand near a window, listen to family conversations, and practice the sound of a parent calling a child's name. That explanation is frightening because it means a human being deliberately tried to lure me outside or close enough to the door to grab me. He may have expected me to open it. Perhaps the glass door was locked and he needed me to release the lock from inside. Calling in my father's voice would make an 11-year-old feel safe enough to approach. Once I reached the door, he could open the smaller window, speak to me, and convince me to come outside. Maybe my scream saved me, but there are problems with the human explanation. How did his voice seem to move through the house? From my bedroom, it sounded as though my dad called from inside. Then it came from the hallway or living room. The old man was outside the front door the entire time, or at least he was there when I arrived. Sound can travel strangely at night, especially through vents, hallways, and windows, but the voice seemed too clear. There is also the speed at which he disappeared. My mom came downstairs almost immediately after I screamed. A real elderly man would need to run away from the door, cross the yard, and hide before she reached the living room. It is possible, especially if he was not as old as he looked, or if darkness made his age difficult to judge. Maybe he had a vehicle nearby. Maybe he knew exactly where to hide. The supernatural explanation's even harder to accept, but it fits the voice. Something may have appeared as an old man and learned how to imitate my father. It showed itself at a distance first, then came closer with each appearance. Some stories describe entities that copy familiar voices to lure people into isolated places. They do not always sound perfect at first, but this one did. It knew my name, it knew my father's voice, it knew that I would leave my bed if I heard him calling. That knowledge feels more disturbing than the man's face. A stranger could learn my name by listening or asking around. He could hear my father speak. But why wait for years and appear only occasionally? Why stand in places where I could see him without making contact? Maybe he enjoyed watching my fear grow. Perhaps each sighting was meant to make me familiar with him, though it had the opposite effect. Or maybe he could not come close immediately. He had to move nearer in stages. I have also considered whether the old man was never real at all. Children sometimes create recurring figures from fear. I may have seen different elderly men and combined them into one memory. The figure outside my window could have been a reflection or dream. Months later, during a night terror, my mind used the same face to create the man at the door. The voice could have been an auditory hallucination during a half-awake state. Sleep-related hallucinations can feel completely real. A person can hear their name, see someone standing nearby, and even believe they walked through the house while still dreaming. That explanation is possible. It is also the one my mother probably accepted. But I remember checking for my father. I remember asking what he wanted several times. I remember the front door clearly. The old man did not appear for only 1 second. I watched him smile, open the window, and speak. Dreams usually become unclear with time. This memory has remained sharp. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had not screamed. Would he have reached through the opening? Would he have told me to unlock the door? Maybe he would have continued speaking in my father's voice, calmly asking me to come outside. At 11 years old, I might have obeyed if he had hidden his face. The only reason I knew something was wrong was because I could see the old man while hearing my dad. Perhaps that was a mistake on his part. Maybe he expected darkness to hide him. I also wonder why he smiled so widely. A real person trying to lure a child would probably attempt to look friendly. But his grin did not comfort me. It made his intentions feel worse. He looked happy that I had followed the voice. The entire encounter may have been a game to him. For years afterward, I was frightened whenever someone called my name from another room. I stopped answering immediately. I would ask who it was or go first to the place where I knew my parents were sleeping. If I heard my dad call at night, I checked his bedroom before walking toward the living room. Nothing similar ever happened again. The old man was gone. I do not know whether he died, moved away, lost interest, or was never human to begin with. My mother never fully believed me, and I cannot blame her. There was no evidence. No one else saw him. The house was secure, and nothing was taken. To everyone else, it was a frightening dream told by an 11-year-old. To me, it was the final meeting in a pattern that had started years earlier. First, he watched me from a crowd. Then he stood down the street. Then he came to my window. After disappearing for months, he used my father's voice to call me out of bed. He waited outside the glass door with a grin on his face. And when he finally spoke, I understood that the voice leading me through the dark house had never belonged to my dad. It belonged to the man who had been getting closer to me for years. When I was about 15 years old, I lived with my family in a very old house. I do not know the exact age of the building, but it had been standing for a long time, and it showed. The floors creaked, the walls were thick, and certain doors never seemed to fit properly in their frames. Pipes knocked inside the walls, especially during cold weather. And every room had its own collection of sounds that we had learned to ignore. My bedroom was in the back part of the house, separated from the main living area by a very large bathroom. The layout was unusual. To reach my room from the rest of the house, you had to pass near or through the area beside that bathroom. Because of this, the room felt more isolated than the other bedrooms. During the day, I liked the privacy. At night, the distance from the rest of the family could feel uncomfortable. If my parents or siblings were talking in another part of the house, their voices reached me only faintly. When everyone went to sleep, my room felt completely cut off. The bathroom between us became a large, dark space that I had to pass whenever I wanted to get water, use the kitchen, or check what was happening elsewhere. The bathroom itself was old. It had an old bathtub, worn flooring, older pipes, and fixtures that looked as though they had been there for decades. The room was much larger than a normal bathroom, almost as if it had originally served another purpose before someone converted it. Nothing openly paranormal had happened to me there before. The bathroom sometimes made sounds, but that was expected in an old house. Pipes moved. Water pressure changed. A faucet could drip. Wood expanded and settled during the night. I had never believed the room was haunted. One night, I was lying in bed watching television. It was late enough that the rest of the house had become quiet, but I was not ready to sleep. I had the television turned low so I would not disturb anyone. The light from the screen moved across my bedroom walls while I relaxed beneath the blankets. Then, I heard water running. At first, I did not find it strange. Because the bathroom was so close to my room, I could hear almost everything that happened inside it. If someone turned on the sink, flushed the toilet, or started the shower, the sound came clearly through the wall. I assumed one of my parents had gotten up to take a late-night shower. Maybe they could not sleep or needed to get ready early for something the next morning. I kept watching television and waited for the normal sounds that should follow. I expected to hear the bathroom light switch click. I expected footsteps. I expected the door to close. I heard none of those things. Only the water continued running. After a few minutes, I started paying closer attention. The sound was not the light flow of a sink faucet. It was heavier and louder, like water pouring into the bathtub. I glanced toward the bathroom door. No light appeared beneath it. The room remained dark. That seemed strange. Someone could use the bathroom without turning on the light, but taking a shower or bath in total darkness did not make much sense. The bathroom had no bright night light or outside lamp that would make it easy to see. Still, I tried to explain it normally. Perhaps one of my parents had left the door partly open and was using light from the hallway. Maybe the bulb had burned out. Maybe someone had turned the water on and briefly walked away to get clothes or a towel. I waited. The water kept running. 5 minutes passed. Then, longer. I lowered the television volume until I could hear the water clearly. It was steady and strong. No one moved in the hallway. No one spoke. I began feeling nervous. If someone was filling the bathtub, it could overflow. If a family member had fallen or become sick inside, they might need help. I got out of bed and approached the bathroom. The closer I came, the louder the water sounded. It was definitely coming from the bathtub. I stood outside the door and listened. I could hear water striking the bottom of the tub, but no movement inside the room. I knocked. Hello? No answer. I waited for one of my parents to tell me they were fine. Nothing. I knocked again, louder this time. Is someone in there? The water continued. That was the only response. I hesitated before opening the door. Part of me expected to find someone standing in the darkness. Another part feared that I might find a family member unconscious on the floor. I slowly pushed the door open. The bathroom was completely dark. I reached for the switch and turned on the light. No one was there. The shower curtain was open enough for me to see the bathtub clearly. The faucet had been turned all the way on. Water poured into the tub at full force. I stood in the doorway, staring at it. There was no person hiding behind the curtain. No one stood near the sink or toilet. The window was closed. I stepped inside and turned off the water. The handle did not feel loose. It did not fall back into place or move under its own weight. I had to grip it and turn it normally, the way anyone would. The sudden silence felt worse than the running water. I checked the tub. The drain was open, so it had not overflowed, but the amount of water showed that the faucet had been running for several minutes. Someone had turned it on. I looked around the room again. There was nowhere for a person to hide. The bathroom was large, but it was open enough that I could see the entire space. I hurried into the main part of the house. My parents were asleep. My siblings were asleep too. I checked each room because I wanted to make sure no one had returned to bed after using the bathroom. Everyone looked genuinely unconscious. No one reacted like they had just been walking around. I woke one of my parents and asked whether they had turned on the bathtub. They had not. I asked my siblings later, and they denied it too. At first, everyone assumed someone else must have done it and forgotten. Maybe one of the younger children had gotten up, played with the faucet, and returned to bed. But I had heard no footsteps. The bathroom was directly beside my room. Anyone entering or leaving should have made some sound. The faucet had also been running for more than 5 minutes. If someone had turned it on by accident, they would have needed to leave it that way and walk back through the house without noticing. The old plumbing became the easiest explanation. My parents said the faucet might have loosened or moved because of water pressure. Old fixtures sometimes behave unpredictably. A worn valve could open slightly, especially if pressure changed somewhere else in the house. That explanation helped me sleep. I told myself the pipes were old, the faucet was old, the entire bathroom needed repair. Nothing supernatural had happened. Even so, I began watching the bathroom more carefully. For the next few nights, every small sound made me lower the television and listen. If a pipe knocked, I expected the bathtub to turn on again. It never did. Weeks passed. Then months. The event became one of those strange stories that stayed in the back of my mind but did not control my life. Whenever I mentioned it, someone blamed the old plumbing. That answer was reasonable enough. About a year later, my family remodeled the bathroom. It was not a small repair. Everything was replaced. The old sink was removed. The bathtub or shower setup was changed. The toilet was replaced. New flooring was installed. The walls were redone. The fixtures were modern. Even the pipes connected to the new appliances were changed. When the work was finished, the room looked completely different. The old bathroom that had frightened me was gone. The new one was cleaner, brighter, and much more modern. Nothing about it looked haunted or ancient anymore. I remember feeling relieved. Whatever caused the bathtub to turn on should have been removed with the old plumbing. If the valve had been worn or the pipes had reacted to pressure, the new system would fix it. For a while, nothing happened. Then one day, I was home alone. I decided to take a shower. Being alone in the house did not normally bother me. I was older, and the bathroom had been completely remodeled. It no longer felt like the same dark room from the first incident. I locked the doors and went into the bathroom. I turned on the shower, removed my clothes, and stepped beneath the water. The shower made enough noise to cover most sounds from the rest of the house. I relaxed and washed normally. Then I heard another faucet turn on. At first, I thought I was mistaken. The sound of shower water can echo strangely. Water running through pipes can make it seem as though another fixture has started. I listened more carefully. The sink was running. The sound was clear. Water was pouring from the bathroom sink only a few feet away from the shower. My first thought was that my mom had come home. Maybe she had entered quietly and needed to wash her hands. It seemed strange that she would come into the bathroom while I was showering without saying anything, but family members sometimes do not think about privacy the same way when they are in a hurry. I called out. "Hey," no response. I waited. The sink continued running. I called louder. "Mom?" Nothing. My body became tense. The shower curtain blocked my view of most of the room. I could see only parts of the floor and wall. Someone could have been standing at the sink. I turned off the shower. The sink water became much louder in the sudden quiet. I slowly pulled the curtain aside. No one was there. The bathroom door was closed. The sink faucet had been turned all the way on. It was not dripping. It was not partly open. Water was pouring at full pressure. I stared at it, remembering the bathtub from the year before. The fixtures were new, the pipes were new, the room had been completely remodeled. The same thing was happening again. I stepped out of the shower. I was naked, wet, and suddenly terrified. I turned off the sink, grabbed the nearest towel, and wrapped it around myself as quickly as possible. Then, I picked up a heavy bat. I do not remember exactly where it had been stored, but I knew I needed something to protect myself. If someone had entered the house and turned on the faucet, they could still be nearby. I did not take time to dress properly. I ran through the house, wearing almost nothing, holding the bat and checking every room. The entire situation would probably have looked ridiculous to anyone watching, but I was genuinely afraid. I searched the hallway. No one. I checked the living room. Empty. I looked in the kitchen, bedrooms, closets, and behind doors. There was no intruder. I called out several times, warning that I had a weapon. No one answered. I checked the front door. It was locked. The back door was locked too. The windows were secure. Nothing had been forced. Nothing was out of place. There were no wet footprints, open drawers, or signs that anyone had entered. I was completely alone. I returned to the bathroom with the bat still in my hand. The sink remained off. I checked the faucet. Like the old bathtub handle, it did not seem loose. I tried turning it slightly to see whether it could fall open on its own. It stayed wherever I placed it. The water required a deliberate movement. Someone or something had turned it all the way on. I stood there, dripping water onto the new floor, staring at the sink. The first incident could be blamed on old plumbing. The second could not. The entire bathroom had been replaced. The timing also felt too similar. Both times I was separated from the rest of the house. Both times water began running while no one else was nearby. The first event happened while I was in my bedroom. The second happened while I was inside the bathroom itself. It felt as though whatever caused it had moved closer. I called my mom. I told her someone might have been in the house, but I had searched and found nothing. When she came home, we checked everything again. She tried to calm me down by offering a practical explanation. A train ran near the house. When trains passed, they created vibrations through the ground and building. My mom believed those vibrations might have affected the pipes or fixtures. In an old house, that was not impossible. Heavy trains can make windows shake, walls move, and objects shift slightly. If a faucet handle was balanced badly, vibration might cause it to open. That explanation made some sense for the old bathroom. The first bathtub had old pipes and old controls, but the sink in the remodeled room was new. The pipes were new. The faucet was modern and firm. I also did not remember hearing or feeling a train that night. Normally, a passing train was noticeable. There would be a low rumble, small vibration, or sound in the distance. I remembered nothing. Even if a train had passed, it seemed impossible for vibration to turn the sink all the way on. A loose handle might move slightly. It might cause a drip. It should not rotate fully and release water at maximum pressure. I did not argue too much with my mom because I wanted to believe her. The train explanation was safer than the alternatives. If vibrations caused it, then the event was strange, but harmless. If someone entered the house, our locks had failed. If something supernatural was responsible, there was no clear way to stop it. After the second incident, I became uncomfortable using the bathroom when no one else was home. I would leave the door partly open. I listened carefully whenever I showered. Sometimes I turned toward the curtain suddenly, expecting to see the sink running. It never happened again. The bathtub never turned on by itself. The sink remained normal. No other faucet in the house behaved that way. That should make the incidents easier to dismiss as coincidence. Instead, their rarity makes them feel more deliberate. A plumbing problem usually repeats. A faulty valve continues dripping or opening. Vibrations from trains would affect the house more than twice. If the faucets had mechanical problems, they should have caused trouble again until repaired. But both incidents happened once. The first involved the bathtub in the old bathroom. The second involved the sink after everything had been replaced. Then it stopped. I have tried to find normal explanations over the years. The old bathtub may have had a damaged valve. Water pressure could have forced it open. The new sink may have been installed incorrectly. A loose handle could have moved because of vibration from the pipes, house, or train. Those are possible explanations. It is also possible that a family member used the bathtub during the first incident and returned to bed before I checked. People can do things while half asleep and not remember. But the second time, I was alone. There was no family member to blame. An intruder could have entered the house using a hidden key or unlocked window. They might have turned on the sink and hidden while I searched. That theory is even harder to believe. Why would a burglar enter only to turn on a faucet? How could they escape from a locked house without being seen? I searched while holding a bat. The doors and windows remained secure. Nothing was stolen. No person was found. Maybe I turned on the sink myself before stepping into the shower and somehow forgot. That sounds possible until I remember the room. I had no reason to run the sink while showering. The water was off when I entered. I clearly heard it begin later. The sound changed suddenly, which was why I thought my mom had come in. I did not imagine a faucet that had been running the entire time. It started while I was behind the curtain. The paranormal explanation is the one I try not to take seriously. Perhaps something was attached to the bathroom rather than the old fixtures. The room had existed in that location for many years. Replacing the walls, floor, sink, and pipes would not remove whatever history remained there. Maybe someone died in the house. Maybe the large bathroom had once been another kind of room. Perhaps water played a role in something that happened long before my family lived there. I never researched the history deeply enough to know. Some people believe spirits repeat ordinary actions from life. A person who once used the bathroom might turn on water without realizing the house had changed. Others believe paranormal activity uses electricity, water, and moving objects to attract attention. Water makes noise. It forces someone to enter the room and investigate. During the first incident, I stayed in bed for more than 5 minutes before checking. The faucet continued until I came closer. During the second, the sink turned on while I was already inside. It is hard not to see that as a progression. The first time, something called me into the bathroom. The second time, it joined me there. That thought is what still gives me chills. If the faucet had started while I was standing at the sink, I would have seen the handle move. Instead, it waited until the shower curtain blocked my view. I heard the water and believed someone else had entered. I called out. No one answered. For several seconds, I stood naked and vulnerable while something happened only a few feet away. I sometimes wonder what I would have seen if I had opened the curtain immediately. Would the sink handle have been moving by itself? Would someone have been standing there? Would I have seen nothing at all? The fact that I found only an empty room does not make the memory less frightening. An intruder would have been easier to understand. A broken pipe would have been easier to repair. An empty bathroom with a fully open faucet gives you nothing to fight or fix. My mom still believes the trains caused it. Maybe she is right. Old houses react in strange ways to vibrations. Even new pipes are connected to old walls and foundations. A train could shake the building enough to move a badly installed fixture. Perhaps I simply failed to notice the rumble because the shower was loud. That is the explanation I prefer. But I have lived around trains and used many faucets. I have never seen one turn itself all the way on because the ground shook. I have also never had the same impossible thing happen in both an old bathroom and its completely remodeled replacement. The house seemed to keep the behavior even after we removed everything that should have caused it. Sometimes I joke that we had a bathroom ghost. It is easier to laugh when enough time has passed. I imagine a harmless spirit that only likes turning on water. Maybe it was confused by the remodel and tested the new sink after losing access to the old bathtub. That version makes the story sound almost funny. It did not feel funny when I was there. At 15, I stood in the dark doorway, listening to water pour into an empty tub. A year later, I stood wet and naked in the same room while a new sink ran at full pressure beside me. Both times, the house was quiet. Both times, no one was there. Both times, the faucet had been deliberately turned. Nothing like it has happened since. Maybe that proves there was never a ghost. Maybe two rare mechanical failures happened a year apart in the same room. But whenever I hear water begin running unexpectedly, I still remember that old house. I remember knocking on the bathroom door and getting no answer. I remember pulling back the shower curtain and finding the sink on, and I remember running through the locked house with a bat, searching for a person who could not possibly have been there. I never found anyone. The water never explained itself. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I still believe that bathroom was not always empty when it looked empty.
So that's where we'll stop tonight. Before you go, remember this. Every story you just heard was real. Real people, real nights, and none of them saw it coming. If that got to you the way it gets to most people, do one thing before you leave. Hit subscribe. I post new stories all the time, and I don't want you to miss them. Take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.